Midway USA brand product designers have one straightforward goal: develop high-quality, technically sound products and deliver them to customers at reasonable prices. If you are immersed in the shooting sports industry and pay close attention to every single detail, you know our products are built right and stand up to everyday use. Who has shooting mats and range bag systems to hunting clothing and just about everything for the outdoors? Log on and shop 24/7 with super fast shipping. MidwayUSA.com. Hunting is not easy. It never has been. It takes dedication, motivation, a lot of patience, and quality gear. If you manage a food plot, put up stands, or need just one more game camera, we can help at MidwayUSA.com. We opened our doors in 1977 and continue to put customers first by offering super fast, same-day shipping. For just about everything for the outdoors, go to MidwayUSA.com.
Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. On this 355th episode of the podcast, we're talking about fly rods, but we're also talking about technique in using those fly rods so that you can present to more fish. I think one of the things that is essential when we talk gear, and I try to do this on Casting Across, the podcast, as well as the website, is that we make sure it is applicable. It's fun to talk about what gear can do, but it's important, it's necessary to talk about what you can do with that gear's capabilities. So, for example, I think it's neat when you see real breakdowns and comparisons of their drag strength, their startup inertia, things like that. But unless that has an application, unless you understand what that means for you, for your fishing situation, then it really doesn't matter a whole lot. I mean, startup inertia doesn't really matter a whole bunch if you're basically using it to store a line for fishing for small trout. And there are some 3 and 4 weight reels that have amazing drag systems in them and are going to give you every and all drag capacity and capability that is out there. But that's not super important. However, if you find yourselves on the flats, fishing for permit, fishing for bonefish, that's where those pieces of technology really, really come to the fore. And so I think that's why it really matters, not just that you know what the benefits of a particular piece of gear are, equipment is, but how and why that matters to you. And so we're going to do that today in talking about one aspect of fly rods, which is fishing with long fly rods. Fishing with long fly rods. Now, what do I mean when I say long fly rods? Well, in one sense, this is a little bit subjective. Well, first of all, what I'm not saying is Euro nymphing rods. Those are all fine and good. The 11-foot, 12-foot, 13-foot, 2, 3, 4 weights that are commonly used for nymph or tight line style nymph fishing are fantastic for that purpose, but they're not really casting tools. They're lobbing tools, which is great. I'm not going to cast any aspersions there. I'm also not talking about tenkara, where you can easily grab a rod that is 12, 16, 18 feet. What I'm really focusing on today is traditional fly rods, one-handed fly rods. Again, I guess I'm not talking about spare rods, things like that. Traditional one-handed fly rods where you're making a traditional cast, but they come in at 9.5 or 10 feet. Or I guess you could even put in this category like 9-foot 2 weights, 9-foot 3 weights, where you would normally be fishing a shorter rod. And I know a lot of folks that listen to the podcast, a lot of folks that read Casting Across, fish a lot of the similar kinds of water that I fish. And I would say the vast majority of my fly fishing is done on small mountain streams. And for people in that kind of world, the most common fly rod that we shoot for is the really light, compact fly rod, both in what it can break down to for travel purposes, but then also something that is a little bit shorter. And that oftentimes pays off really, really nicely, especially when you're fishing streams that have significant overhead cover. Also, when you're moving and navigating through brush and through the forest, it's nice to have that, 7.5, 7, even 6.5 or 6-foot fly rod. And these are perfectly good casting tools. However, I think there's a time and a place, and I've written on this extensively, for that 9-foot 3 weight. And I just think of my favorite streams up in the White Mountain National Forest, where I live here in New Hampshire. There are the wide floodplains on a lot of these rivers, which means that I have all the room in the world to make casts. I'm still fishing those tiny little dry flies. I'm still fishing little, maybe even a small nymph rig, or I'm fishing a small streamer because I'm going for those 6, 8, and really big 10-inch brook trout. However, having that 9-foot rod allows me to do a little bit more. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about today. And I'm going to talk about it in really 3 different ways, really focusing on 3 different aspects of presentation. And so the first one is actually going to pick up on that example I was using just a moment ago, which is when you have overhead clarity, you have an unobstructed area in which you can cast. Having that long rod allows you to do a few more things. It allows you to have a longer casting stroke, which allows you to minimize the imperfections in your cast. So, I mean, I like casting 6 and 6.5 and 7-foot rods. But a lot of times, that casting stroke has to be so quick, especially on those shorter casts, 20 and even 30 feet, that if there's a problem in your cast, you don't have a large opportunity to compensate through the normal stroke of your casts. So what I mean by that is that you're simply your forward cast and your back cast with a 6-foot rod is only moving the tip of that fly rod a relatively small amount, relatively, compared to something like a 9-foot fly rod, in which you can adapt to maybe your loop starting to collapse, maybe the wind knocking your loop down in your cast. You're able to adjust with applying a little bit more power, and because that power translates up those 9 feet, now you have a little bit more energy. Now, the same thing is true, not just fishing a small mountain stream for, brookies or cutthroats or whatever, but if you are on a larger river, and you are fishing a 9.5 or 10-foot fly rod, you have that same benefit. Now, there are drawbacks to this as well. For example, if it's a really, really windy day, now you have that problem that you have to deal with. But generally speaking, this is a great way to kind of hammer out some imperfections in your cast as long as you are a proficient caster. So that's the first thing. The first benefit, I think, of fishing a longer fly rod for your circumstances. So again, that might only be a 9-footer if you are fishing a place where you have traditionally, routinely fished the shorter fly rods, or bumping that extra 6 inches to a foot onto your fly rod if you want a little bit more of a stroke to your cast. Now, I just want to make it very clear, this does not mean there's any kind of disadvantage to fishing a 9-foot fly rod, but this is why these rods are made and why they are beneficial. So that's the first thing. You have a little bit more flexibility in your cast. I'm not going to necessarily argue that you can make longer casts with a longer fly rod, because, again, the flex of the rod is going to be really what determines the power that you can put into that cast more than the length of it. And, of course, it all comes down to skill. But kind of summarize that first point, you have a little bit more of an option in how you deal with imperfections in your cast with more length to a fly rod. That is also why even folks who I know are going to be wanting to fish small streams, I still get them out there with an 8.5 or 9-foot rod on the grass to practice, because it allows for better feel, it allows for better mechanics, it allows for just kind of getting the fundamentals down before you get into a game day situation. I would say a similar example would be when you are a quarterback and you are practicing throwing, you're practicing your throwing mechanics without somebody rushing you. You're practicing your throwing mechanics without a helmet, without shoulder pads. You're practicing your throwing mechanics as you are maybe even just dropping back or being stationary. However, you get those mechanics down, and then as someone is rushing you, as you have all your gear on, as you're moving laterally, maybe even in the opposite direction of your handedness, you can make those throws. And those are the things that impress everybody who's watching. All right. So that is kind of the first point, that having a longer rod allows you to compensate for some issues either in your cast or even in your casting conditions. The second one is incredibly applicable, and that is mending. Mending. I'm sure there's a stat out there that communicates how much more you could fish if your line was presented perfectly. That is to say, how much longer your drift would be if your line was in the right situation. I mean, even think about that under normal calm conditions. You're casting across an upstream and you're allowing that fly to drift down, but because your line is heavier than that fly, it is being pulled along by that current much, much quicker. This is without any sort of competing currents. This is without any sort of like rocks or vegetation or anything like that in the way. That's without any sort of eddies or little pools. This is under normal circumstances. That line is going to move faster than that fly. Now, of course, you can compensate by adding a little bit of something into your cast to get that leader and tippet to kind of dogleg out. But for a normal cast, you're going to be mending. So, if you could mend well, each and every cast you make and presentation you make, you could have a good drift a certain percentage longer. Now you multiply that over the course of the day, that means that your fly is in front of fish that much more. I don't know what it is. Off the top of my head, I'm going to say something to the effect of 15% for somebody who is doing a good job and staying on top of it. It probably can be higher for those who are very, very skilled, and much, 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 much lower for the rest of us who are making just kind of quick, pragmatic casts and then not mending because we are staring mouth agape at our fly and willing fish to come up and bite it. But if you have a longer fly rod, mending is often much, much easier. And this is because you can do more with it. You can simply use the tip of that rod to move the belly of your line as it goes from the tip of your rod down to where it makes contact with the water. But then also you have the ability to sweep that line a little bit more. And you can do that with the tip of the rod simply by moving your wrist, or you could do that with the tip of your rod and the length of your rod by moving your entire forearm kind of at the elbow and shoulder. Having more length allows you to do that a little bit more. I think every one of us who fishes small streams knows that it is quite difficult to mend line on a longer cast with difficult currents with that 7-foot rod. It's amazing how much of a difference a 1.5 feet will make when it comes to mending. Now, this doesn't mean it's impossible. This doesn't mean it's insurmountable. Again, it just means that it's easier. So you combine those first two reasons for fishing a longer fly rod, given your circumstances, and you have the benefit of not just being able to cast a little bit more effectively and efficiently, but now you can mend more effectively and efficiently. So what does this mean? Very, very practically, it means that your fly is in front of more fish longer. It means that your fly is in front of more fish longer. So you may lose out on the ability to move through the woods a little bit easier and a little bit more quickly. You may lose out on having the tip of that fly rod closer to you and the benefits that affords you, not only as you cast, but truly in fighting a fish. It's easier, especially for smaller fish, to fight a fish on a shorter fly rod. But a longer fly rod has its complications, but really it's angling, and you know what that means, better for you when it is longer. So those are the first two. Now, these next couple are things that I think are certainly not universal, but may very well be applicable to you. And the first one is fishing out of a watercraft. So I actually bought a new 9.5-foot fly rod. I'll talk about that here at the end of the podcast. I am super impressed with it. I haven't talked about it yet, even though I've had it for I think 7 months now, because I wanted to kind of put it through its paces. But fishing out of a canoe, fishing out of a kayak, even fishing out of a john boat, having a little bit more length of that rod is going to do wonders in picking line up off of the water. You don't realize how much of your body you are engaging for different aspects of the fly cast until parts of your body are taken away. And I think a really big thing that people are startled by is when you are sitting down, how you can absolutely cast fly rod. You can cast fly rod really, really well. But to not be able to move your hips as freely as you can when you are standing, like when you're waiting, or even when you are standing up in a drift boat, really changes the dynamics of your cast, as does just the ability to pivot as you pick up fly line. So I think that the benefit that I've really appreciated about fishing a 9.5 foot fly rod out of a canoe or a kayak is my ability to pick up fly line, aerialize that line. So that is to say, if I've got 40 or 50 feet off of the water, stripping enough in or retrieving enough so that when I pull that line up into making my back cast, it's going to actually be a legitimate back cast, not just pulling the line out from in front of me and then figuring things out and making a new cast. Having those extra 6 inches does make a difference. Now, I'll throw this in here too. Does this mean that you are needing to go out and spend $300 to $500 to buy a rod that's 6 inches longer? No, I don't think so. But what this does mean is that you need to be aware that if you are coming to a point where you're making a purchase, then those extra 6 inches may really be beneficial for you if you find yourselves cruising around a pond, if you find yourself in a canoe paddling down a river. And this is true for trout. This is true for bass. This is true for any kind of fish that you're going to find yourself fishing for. So if you are in a watercraft, having those extra 6 or 12 inches can be really, really beneficial, not just as you're pulling line off the water, but your overall cast, as I mentioned before. All right, so just to recap the first three things, we had if you have the space, then you're going to be able to cast a little bit more and with a little bit more flexibility if you have a longer rod. Secondly, you can absolutely make better mends when you have a longer rod. Thirdly, it's a great way to pick line off of the water if you are in a situation where you are in a boat, or I would even say, and I didn't mention this earlier, wading a little bit deeper. And here's the last one. It's a real shocker. You can do better tight line nymphing. I know that's a very simple thing, but if you want a rod that can do it all, the amount of opportunities presented to you by adding 6 inches to a foot to your normal 4-weight, 5-weight, 6-weight, whatever your trout rod's going to be, is going to give you some of the benefits that you would have fishing a Euro nymphing rod. Now, it might not have that delicate tip. It might not be weighted the same, but you can easily compensate for that. And again, this is one of those things where you can buy one rod that does a lot of things, or two rods that do a couple of things. Having that 10-foot 5-weight that is a great dry fly rod, but then also throwing on a different reel with a different line, and it may be even that reel weighs a little bit differently so that it balances a little bit more rear heavy towards your hand, your body, your reel. Now you can do some of that tight line nymphing. And that's not even necessary. You can do tight line nymphing, and I know we need to hear this with our consumer-driven culture, both fly fishing culture and culture at large. But you can do tight line nymphing with normal fly fishing stuff, normal gear, your normal weight forward line, and just a few modifications to your leader and tippet. But having those 6 inches gives you a little bit more reach. Having those 12 inches gives you even a little bit more reach. There are plenty of Euro nymphing rods that are only 10 feet long. So by you fishing that 10-foot kind of all-around rod, now you are getting to that same reach. Maybe not built the same, maybe not balanced the same, but it gives you that similar reach. And then, of course, you have all the benefits that come with that. So all that to say, I've been asked this question before, like why would I want to get a longer fly rod? We've got 9 foot kind of ingrained in us as like that's as long as a fly rod should be. Anything else is like weird or novel or whatever. Well, that shouldn't be the case. It's certainly true that 9 is the most common, but there are plenty of longer rods, and the reasons I've enjoyed them, as I said before, one, when I'm fishing for brook trout, and I have an open canopy above me, I just really enjoy that casting and the mending and the fish fighting that comes with having that longer rod. And actually, I will say, people always say, "Oh, I want that 2-weight so I can feel that fish fighting," and I've talked about how that's kind of silly logic. That's a little bit strong. I'm sorry. That's a little bit of an overstatement that you're not going to feel a fish on a 4-weight and it's going to feel like you're fighting a whale on a 2-weight. It's a little bit of an overstatement. But if you really want to feel that fish, fight, then fight him on a 9-foot rod as opposed to a 6-foot rod. There's more bend. There's more flex. So anyway, that's one of the reasons why. The second big reason why is when I'm on watercraft or I'm wading deep. So watercraft or wading deep, which translates into the third. I didn't allude to this before. It's been very freshwater focused. But when I am walking and wading the beach, like say here in New England fishing for stripers, having a 10-foot fly rod allows me to have more reach, allows me to translate more power into my cast, and especially with modern fly rod technology, a good stroke on that cast on a 10-foot fly rod is going to help you punch that 8-weight, 9-weight, 10-weight line up into the air as you're being crashed on by waves a little bit better than a 9-foot rod. Again, once the wind comes in, it changes the dynamics, but that's a whole other conversation. So don't be afraid of buying that extra 6 or 12 inches if you are in the market for a rod, and some of the criteria and circumstances that I have mentioned may apply to you. If there's a particular question you have about this or about the mechanics of fishing with a rod that's a little bit longer, don't hesitate to reach out. Matthew@castingacross.com. As always, love to hear questions, love to hear comments, and even if you have an accusation, I'll listen to that as well. This week on Casting Across, the first article is called Danger in the Hollows and on the Streets. We often talk about, okay, you can get in trouble out in the woods if you get lost. You can get in trouble out in the woods if you fall down. You can get in trouble if you get eaten by a bear, you get stung by a wasp, whatever it may be. However, there are some more human dangers that you may encounter that they're not new, but they're becoming more and more frequent. And they happen in the middle of nowhere, and they happen if you're fishing close to home. So I talk about a few of those. It's pretty much common sense, but at the same time, I feel like it's important to talk about common sense stuff these days, because it's not as common as you would like. Wednesday's article is called Video, Read a Glimpse into a Western Trout Town. Read a glimpse. Hopefully, that's clever enough that people don't think it's stupid. All right. But this is a 1-minute book review of Traver's Corners by Scott Waldie. It's a great book. A lot of folks have read it. A lot of people recommended it to me when I was, just writing articles before I was doing videos on book reviews, and I truly enjoyed it. But it goes past 1 minute because I actually mentioned 2 more books by Scott Waldie in that video. But check that review out. You go to the website and you can click on it there, or you can go to YouTube. It's just Casting Across on YouTube, and you'll find me and my book review videos and some other videos I have. If you haven't subscribed, please do that. That way you can get updates. I'm hoping to add a couple of different more types of videos as the weather starts to get a little bit more squirrely here in New England. This week's recommendation on the podcast is the fly rod I mentioned to you. It is Redington's EDC, and that stands for Everyday Carry. And I have been fishing the 9.5-foot 5-weight, and I absolutely love it. It is a versatile fly rod. It is delicate, but it is strong. It does everything I talked about today, talking about longer fly rods. And there's some cool features. The hook keeper is underneath the cork. There's a ruler on the fly rod. I'm not going to buy a rod for those things, but they're cool that they're there. But I really love the way this rod casts. I cast about 3 or 4 different models back in the winter, and I kind of told myself, all right, I'm going to get a new fly rod this year. Which one am I going to get? Of all the different fly rods I cast at the fly fishing shows back in the wintertime, and there's a couple of rods that really were vying for my attention, but I'm very happy I went with the 9.5-foot 5-weight from the good folks at Redington. This is, Redington's premier rod, which means it comes in at under $400. I have long maintained that if you want a great value, buy the high-end rod from rod manufacturers that kind of come in at a lower price point. Really, really enjoy the fly rod. If you have more particular questions about this rod, then do let me know, or this series as a whole, because I think I've cast, like I said, 3 or 4 different models. But I'll put a link to the whole line of EDC or Everyday Carry rods from Redington in the show notes and this podcast page over at Casting Across. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast app and then rate the podcast in Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.
Bow hunting all comes down to a moment. And in the moment, you want equipment on your bow that will get the job done. Trophy Ridge products are the tools bow hunters trust. React technology sights, rests, stabilizers, and quivers to help a bow hunter be successful in the field. And those tools are from Trophy Ridge.
Hey guys, this is Melissa Bachman. Are you ready to stop spooking deer before it's even time to hunt them? Then you need the new Flex S Dark cellular trail camera from SpyPoint. With a no-glow flash option, long-lasting solar power, and a ton of settings that can be changed anytime through the SpyPoint app, there are no more excuses for letting your deer get wise before the season even starts. So check it out for yourself and see why the SpyPoint Flex S Dark is the unstoppable and undetectable scouting tool you need for your next hunt.